Right, so I think we will get started. So welcome to our first virtual event, Moving Home and COVID-19. I hope you are all safe and well. Before we get started, I'll just do a couple of introductions and give you an idea of how the event today will kind of work. So to start off with, my name is Abby and I work at ESPC. I am going to be your host for today. We've got my colleague Paul, who is our CEO here at ESPC. We also have another Paul, who is our mortgage advisor at ESPC Mortgages. And we also have Graham Keith, who is one of our member firm solicitors, and he'll be answering some questions for us today as well. And you'll also see we've got my colleague Leanne, who has joined today, and she is here just in case there is any technical issues that happen and we have to join someone to jump in. Hopefully we won't have any problems with the internet, but she is there just in case. So yeah, the event today will start off with a brief introduction from Paul. He'll just give us a bit of background around how the property market has been kind of acting so far this year and affected by COVID-19. And then we'll move on to our Q&A section. So firstly, thank you very much for everybody who submitted the questions. We had loads of really interesting questions come in. Now, what we've tried to do is focus on the ones that were kind of around the same kind of themes. If there is maybe a question that was slightly more niche, and we've not managed to answer it, then please do feel free to get in touch and we can pop you kind of in touch with one of our property experts directly. Now, just to let you know, as this is a webinar format, we can't see or hear you, but we do have the little Q&A box down at the bottom. And please feel free to pop any questions that kind of come up during the event into that box. And if we have some extra time at the end, then we'll do kind of a quick fire and put our panel on the spot and ask them to answer some of your questions. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll pass over to Paul.
Thank you, Abby. Hello, everybody. I know this is one way. I visualize people sitting outside now on their phones and their tablets in a lovely sunny garden listening to this. So sure that's not the case, but anyway. So welcome to ESPC's first virtual event on moving home and COVID-19. There's a snappy title for you all. But we thought it was important to maybe take this opportunity to have a chat with you all. We have, as you, I'm sure, are all well aware, moved to be relaxed from Monday, so a significant change there in that. And I think today we'd like to walk you through what that actually means in some ways. But before I do that, what I thought we would start with is really just talk you through the different stages that we've seen this year in the property market. We've already had 2 stages and there's a 3rd stage to come. So let me start at the beginning. So let's look at stage 1. So we're calling stage 1 the market between January and February. What we saw in the first couple of months of the year was a real strong supply. We were up 3.6% year on year on properties coming to the market. Certainly one of the challenges we'd had in 2019 was the lack of stock. You know, when a property came on, we could sell it. And so it was encouraging to see that we were seeing slightly more properties coming to the markets in January and February. In addition to that, we were seeing prices really held up very well. We'd seen an increase of 5.2% year on year. And the speed of sales, so the time from coming on the market to selling, was 26 days. So properties were selling very, very rapidly. And in addition to that, we were achieving over the home report still, so 102.4% of the home report. So at that stage, we were set fair. We were expecting it to be a really good, strong year for the property market. And then we entered phase 2 in March. We probably weren't aware we were in a second phase or a stage at that point. But certainly as we moved further into March, things became a little more apparent. And it's probably safe to say from around mid-March, the news agenda was dominated quite rightly by COVID-19, and we started to see a decline in activity on the website and generally on members reporting the same in terms of just general activity, viewings, valuations, etc. Certainly from the 23rd of March, we saw a real tail off, and that was a significant gate because that was the announcement of lockdown. And really from that point onwards, for a period of time, we were really experiencing Christmas levels. So our quietest time of year for people visiting the site, interacting with the site. So we were at that level. So it's safe to say activity was down around 85 to 90% of what we'd normally expect. And I think it was clear from the government that In terms of moves, we were talking about moves that were only reasonably necessary and a case could be made for those moves to go ahead. So for really essential moves. And we'll talk about it later. I'm sure Graham will give us an update in terms of line registry. There was a period when nothing could be progressed for a couple of days, and I'll ask Graham to elaborate on that later. But what became clear, certainly as we were in this second stage and we were in this lockdown, is that innovation, very quickly our members got used to working from home and also very used to innovating and bringing new ideas to the marketplace. So we started to see the growth of things like virtual viewings and virtual valuations. So instances maybe where a seller would show a client around the property using a phone. Who'd have thought that in January, but that's how quickly we moved to these things. And it was interesting, by about April and into early May, we were starting to see people making offers based on what they're seeing from a virtual viewing. And some of these offers were subject to a physical viewing later. So they were saying, well, I'll offer, this is my offer, but I'd like to see it later. Though we did have some cases, I think it's fair to say, didn't it, Abby, where people actually were buying from having never seen the property. So, that discuss, but that happened. And as I say, we also started to see people having virtual valuations. So the agent again would give in a value based on the view they'd seen from the phone, and those properties ultimately would come to market as and when they could. Probably from April, mid-April, we started to see activity pick up again on the site. And probably the significant uptick really took place in and around the 13th of May. That date's significant because that was when we saw the relaxation for the property market in England. And certainly from that point onwards, we really started to see a sharp increase in general activity on ESPC. And it's safe to say, as we've moved into June here, that's now culminated and it's now having activity levels over and above what we were seeing this time last year. So, for instance, only a day or two ago, we had 1,300 home reports downloaded in a single day from our sites for people actively looking to buy a property, over 450 viewing requests. So, a real significant amount of activity. And I think what that tells us is, as we move into stage 3 now, that there is a significant pent-up demand that our hard-pressed firms, many of whom still have staff on furlough, are going to have to service. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. What comes after the pent-up demand is serviced is an unknown, and I'm sure that might be one of the questions we get asked about the outlook for the medium term, but we can talk about that later. But just before I pass back to Abby, I just really wanted to make the point that really, whilst we are now into the sort of third stage, it really isn't a return to normality as we would know it. And it's an often used phrase now, but we are now in the new normal. So that will really be around virtual first. So in terms of viewings, you would be encouraged to watch a video or interact with a 360 tour. Many of those would be on ESBC's site. Some might be emailed to you by the firm. We won't see a return to open viewings anytime soon. So what we're all going to do at weekends, I don't know. My girlfriend's really disappointed by that fact. But again, in all seriousness, we just have to stay safe. And really at the moment, a mass gathering in a property for a viewing isn't on the cards. And certainly as a viewer or a buyer, you'll need to be ready maybe to answer more questions around your status and your health. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So things will change, and possibly a little bit more flexibility might be needed in terms of the house moving date. It may not always be on a Friday now because removal, people are going to be very busy. And it might be, as I say, that a viewing gets made and then somebody starts to show symptoms and that viewing has to get paused, etc. So some changes coming, but as I say, that's really a whistle-stop tour of the stages we've gone through, and I'll pass back to Abby.
Thank you for that, Paul. Now, what we also have is we have a wee poll for you guys to answer, just to kind of make sure you're listening and have a bit of fun. So I'm just going to launch that now. So that has got 2 questions in it. Now, just to highlight, if you were on mobile, you might not be able to see that come up on your screen straight away, and you might have to go onto the tab. But if you would like to, it'd be great to kind of get some of your thoughts on our questions. Our first question is, how do you feel about in-person viewings? And then our second question is, how have your home moving plans been affected by COVID-19? So I'm just seeing some folks answer that. I'll give you a couple more minutes just to fill that in.
We can't vote, can we, Abby? We have to sit in our hands.
No, we can't, but the answers are coming in thick and fast.
That's
So
good.
it's kind of fastest finger first.
Should be a prize, shouldn't it?
I was just thinking, I was like, unfortunately, we don't have a prize.
Yeah, you get to go on a viewing of your choice.
Perfect. So, oh, we've got one more, I think. Oh, we're nearly up to everybody having filled in the poll.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right. So, what we'll do is we will end the poll there. And I think it'll be interesting to see, we'll share the results. So what you should now be able to see is those results on your screen. And Paul's just going to talk through those a wee bit.
Thank you. So how do you feel about in-person viewings? It seems to be the overwhelming majority here feel comfortable about them as long as social distancing and guidelines are adhered to. So again, I think that's very encouraging for the market. Interesting to see that everybody here, I will not take part in-person viewings. No one's voted for that. So again, I think that's encouraging, and encouraging that we all want to stay safe as well, I think, and do this the right way. Okay, a little bit more split, I think, on this one, isn't it? How have your home moving plans been affected? Obviously, just probably the profile of the people we have joining us today. 17% I was in a process and they've been delayed. Again, there might be some questions about that later that Graham can chat through. Planning to move, but my plans have been slightly delayed. Planning to move, but I'm slightly postponing. Planning to move, but I put my plans on hold, 13%. And 26% I wasn't planning to move before COVID-19, however, decided to move in the near future. Okay, so that seems to be the majority. It is interesting. We've had some press inquiries, haven't we, Abby, from journalists saying, look, are you seeing a change in behaviours here? And then sitting down south, what we did see early on is that people were starting to maybe reevaluate their own homes. Or their partners, no, but mainly their own homes. And it was around, should we now consider we needed an extra room for a study? We would like a garden because we've been locked in, etc. So I think it's interesting, and I think we've seen an awful lot of valuations in the last couple of weeks being requested, and maybe that's people just taking stock and starting to weigh things up. And if we now see over time more people moving, working from home, do you need to work as close to the office? Can you live somewhere in the country, et cetera, et cetera? So there are things which will play out. As I say, we're just entering the next phase of this. It's very early days, really, in many ways. But it's interesting to see, as I say, too early to say there's been a definite shift. But as I say, interesting that certainly people are starting to think that way.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. What we'll do now is we will move over to our Q&A section. So if I could just ask Paul, DeMarco and Graham to pop on unmute. So they are all ready to answer, and we will go to our first question. So our first question is for Graham, and it is, when will in-person viewings be allowed to take place and how will they work?
Thank you, Abby, and good morning, everyone. As Paul indicated in his introduction, the in-person viewings are going to be part of a hybrid approach, if you like, that we'll be taking. This is not a return to the pre-COVID-19 normality. There will be an emphasis on, to a degree, vetting potential viewers, first of all, by asking if they have seen the property via a virtual viewing or something similar, whether that be something that's pre-recorded or an interactive session with the seller on FaceTime or other such platform. But to answer the question, from the 29th of June, in-person viewings can take place, which is great news. How it will work, I suppose maybe just to pause there for a moment and mention that if you are shielding, it is still important to take that into account, because that may override your eagerness to market your property. If you are shielding, you have to give some thought as to whether or not it is appropriate for you to be either viewing a property or inviting people into your home. Generally speaking, face coverings are being recommended for both your and the other person's safety. And for the buyer, in that first phase of virtual viewing, it's important to treat it as if it were an in-person viewing, if you like. It's something that we've never done before, so it will take everyone a bit of time to get used to it. But if you are viewing a flat, for example, and there is a communal door, I would ask the seller not to just show you the flat itself, but maybe walk down the communal stair to see the doorway. Is it secure? Is it blowing open in the wind? These are the kind of things that you would see in an in-person viewing if you had gone to an open viewing in years gone by, but or even ask them to look out the window to see what the view is before you decide to progress on to requesting an in-person viewing. So in-person viewings will be by appointment only, and as Paul hinted, there is a pent-up demand here, so you may have to be patient in order to get an appointment. So that's why there may be an element of vetting of viewers to see if you are a viable potential buyer. It would be important for you to obviously wash hands before you go. Take hand gel or sanitizer with you as well. Also, the Scottish Government guidelines suggest that, or recommend that you restrict the number of people who you take with you. So, don't take all the children with you. Don't take your mum and dad and other family members, but just your immediate household, again to protect both yourself and the people who are selling the property by restricting the volume of people who are coming in and out of the property. Try as best not to touch any surfaces whilst you're viewing the property, and keep your distance as best you can. As for sellers who are viewing their property, it is important that they just make sure they do clean everything before and after the viewing, particularly if a viewer has touched anything, and also make sure that all parts of the property are accessible. So if there is a loft in a loft hatch up to the attic, make sure it is lowered and the ladder is down and what have you, and doors to cupboards, things like that are all open as well, just again to ensure that no one has to touch anything unless it is absolutely necessary. But 29th of June is when in-person viewings can take place, so that's great news.
Perfect. And a kind of a follow-up question on that one for you as well, Graham. How far can I travel to view a property? Does it have to be the neighbourhood I'm in, or if I'm interested in kind of moving to a different neighbourhood, how will that work?
Yeah, well, the government guidance, which was published just earlier this week, doesn't place any restriction on the distance that you can travel. I think the guidance said that you are allowed to leave your home to undertake activities in connection with a purchase, including viewing residential properties, but there was no 5-mile or other distance limit placed on that. Of course, from the 3rd of July, generally the 5-mile limit is being eased, but for the immediate period between the 29th of June and the 3rd of July, there is no restriction there for the purpose of viewing a property. I think if you are traveling much further afield, it probably makes sense to plan that trip so that you're not, in other ways interacting with other people or other properties, which may put you or other people at risk. But presently, there is no distance restriction on how far you can travel to view a property.
Perfect, thank you very much. So we'll move on to our next question, and it is, will properties be marketed prior to the 29th of June? And that one is for Paul Hilton.
Thank you, Abby Fraser Davidson. Give me my full name there. Yes, I think certainly the government's guidelines from March made it clear if a move was reasonably necessary, you could market a property. I think what they were trying to ensure is that we didn't see a mass properties come to the market. It was really, so when we look at reasonableness necessary, it would be if there's a financial imperative, if there was a emotional distress, if there was a case that could be made. And certainly we've seen that there's been a small number, and it has only been a small number of properties that have come on. And certainly I think now what we're starting to see is those properties getting booked for coming to the market, post 29th of June. So yes, there have been some, there's been cases made for those properties, but we'll now expect to see a significant uptake in the number of properties from next week.
Perfect, thank you very much. And this one is for Graham. How can I get a pre-sale valuation?
Okay, well, again, this is something that will be done via appointment. So almost in a similar way to what we would have done pre-COVID-19, make contact with your solicitor or estate agent in the first instance, and the solicitor will or estate agent will arrange a time for the valuer to come out to see you. Again, I think as Paul alluded to earlier, there may well be some additional questions that you are asked when that appointment is being made. For example, do you or a family member have symptoms? Are you shielding? Have you been tracked and traced? These sorts of things, which maybe, well, we're all kind of used to these kind of things nowadays. The person who is coming to your property will have to take certain precautions. They will be wearing a mask, they will be wearing gloves, they will no doubt have gels and other protective stuff with them. As much as you want them to give you a fabulous valuation for your pre-sale valuation, don't offer them a cup of tea or any other sort of hospitality, because again, that just increases the interaction that you're having with them. But in a similar way to when you're inviting people in to view your home, make sure you do clean surfaces within your property before and after, and keep your distance when the viewer is there. But again, because there is this pent-up demand, there is going to be a surge in activity. So you may have to be patient just to simply get an appointment in the first place, because this process may mean it is a little bit more labor intensive, and it may take longer for these pre-sale valuations to take place. But there is no charge for doing it. So for those who mentioned in the poll that they are thinking about it or maybe not thinking about it, even if you just want to find out, is this a realistic prospect for you to sell your property this year, please do get in touch with your agent. They will more than happily come to see you. And as I say, there is generally no charge for doing this. It is a no obligation service that's my firm and indeed many others offer.
And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Graham, that some of this, again, virtual valuations are still there. If somebody felt, I'd far rather just chat it through in the first instance with a firm and take them around with my phone, that still remains an option, and again, it mitigates any risk if people are concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the positives that has come from this experience is that we are all very much more used to Zoom, FaceTime, other platforms where we can do these kind of things. It's not as terrifying as before. And yes, if you just want to have a dipping my toe in the water type of first meeting with an agent, then that's an entirely sensible way to approach it. And yeah, we would encourage people to do that, as I say, simply as a sort of fact-finding exercise at this stage, if nothing else, and then you can decide whether you take things forward. Obviously, if you are just simply relying on a virtual viewing, the formal valuation in a home report isn't necessarily going to be at that level. There may be things that are discovered during the in-person valuation that can't be seen in a virtual one.
Yeah, I always remember that sometimes the seller wouldn't say, "Oh, we don't want to show you that cupboard under the stairs." I'm like, "Oh, we need to."
Well, it's a great thing. The awful whiff of dampness from that cupboard. The virtual viewing will be a great way of masking it.
There you go.
Perfect. So we're going to move over to Paul D. And the question for him is, am I able to apply for a mortgage just now? And has anything changed on mortgage conditions compared to pre-COVID-19?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, that's a very good question. So you can apply for a mortgage just now, absolutely. So let's look pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, you're required, a 5 or 10% deposit as a minimum deposit. Currently, there's lots of restrictions with lots of lenders now where you do require a 15% deposit, or even 20 with some lenders. There are still a few lenders that will still offer you a mortgage with a 5 or 10%, but predominantly is 15%. A lot of these lenders that have got the criteria where it's 15%, basically are just waiting to see how the market goes over the next few months. And hopefully, and I'm pretty confident in the near future, they'll all come back into the 5 or 10% mortgage market again. So yes, you can, but the restrictions are mainly the deposit.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Paul. So we're moving to the other Paul, Paul H. Will surveyors be allowed to go into properties to carry out home reports?
Short answer is yes. It's essential because that's really to have a property on the market. You need a home report, and again, from 29th of June, that's for all properties now. I think the surveyors, as Graham has alluded to, in advance of coming out, will drop you a line just saying, to get your property prepared. So that might be making sure doors are open, access to the loft space, or as they say, the cupboard under the stairs is left open to minimise the touching of surfaces. But yes, surveyors will be back out there, completely back out there from 29th.
Perfect. And a follow-up question to you on that one, Paul. Will home reports be granted an extension past their normal 90-day period? And will surveyors grant a free refresh?
Okay, that's a good question, and I think where that question's coming from. So clearly, what's asked is so a home report's completed when it first comes on the market, and that home report endures. Once a buyer is found, generally it's asked that the lender sort of will ask for evaluation if there's a re-inspection required of a property, and generally if it's within 3 months, after 3 months they need to go back. We did see during the lockdown that some lenders, and I keep me right here, Paul, the market I think was it Skipton and a few others said they were prepared to wait 6 months they would take a home report that was 6 months old. There was a slight change there, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's correct. Some lenders are 6 months. Some are still sticking to the rules of 3 months, though.
Yeah, so I think it's fluid. I think it's safe to say I think that remains fluid. And again, I'm sure we'll learn more as we get into that as well. Again, the other challenge I think at the moment is, one of the reasons that the valuation is sort of within that 3 month is to try and keep a finger on the pulse of the market. Well, that's been slightly different with a low level of activity. So there might be a caveat that goes in future home reports around valuations as well. So, but again, that's all to come really. But yeah, long answer to a short question. I think summer is 90 days, but I think we'll probably see a return to norm now.
Certainly the home reports that I have received recently do contain a comment which will be inserted as standard from now on to say that the future is potentially uncertain, because we don't really know what is around the corner following lockdown being fully eased. But that is just something that will be in every home report as standard. It is not particular to the property that you are looking at. So if you do see that in a home report, please don't be alarmed. It is something that will be recommended or will be required of surveyors by their professional body, the RICS.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. So this question is for Graham. Do you expect a backlog at Land Registry as they process house moves due to happen during lockdown?
Simple answer to that would be no. The background to this is that in Scotland, unlike south of the border, the process of registering your title deeds once you had completed your purchase was that the physical hard copy documents had to be submitted to the land register. The reason for that is that the opportunity for fraud of dealing with a hard copy document with a wet signature is that much less than if you are accepting scanned or electronic documents. But once lockdown was in place, the land register said that for obvious reasons, their staff would be handling a huge amount of paper from a variety of sources. And in order to keep their staff safe, they said that the land register was temporarily closed. So in the intervening period, the land register has put in place a process whereby for the majority of types of transactions, documents can be submitted electronically. There are certain requirements that the solicitors have to abide by and rules that we have to adhere to, but without boring you with those details. But to answer the question, the process of registering the title is something that happens after the transaction has completed. So it's not necessarily going to impact on the transaction itself, or indeed the likely time that the documents will be made available after the registration process has been completed. The volume of transactions has been massively lower over the last three months, which have completed. So the backlog of cases at the land register should not have drastically increased in this period.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think I'd be actually just on that. If there's a challenge, it might be more around things like the physical removal and being able to book in a removal company. I mean, we had a chat with some. We were on the working party for government, and clearly one of the things the removal companies were saying is about moving safely and the number of people they could have on one job. So, you know, it might be less people on the job, so there's less resources, so that they're unable to move as many people on a given day than they would have done in a normal time. So it may be again that we spoke about flexibility earlier. Maybe get used to a removal day that isn't a Friday. I don't know why we ended up on a Friday, Graham, because it's quite a frantic day, and if it doesn't happen on a Friday, then you've got the Saturday when you can't fix things. So I think solicitors would be keen, would they, to see if it moved to other days of the week, maybe?
Yeah, I think it has always just been, you know, most buyers are moving into a home, you know, which they are going to be living in themselves. So they take one day off on the Friday, move in on the Friday, and then they have the, you know, the whole weekend to get themselves settled. But yes, absolutely, I agree. We are probably going to move to a situation where the move-in date doesn't have to be, you know, a Friday. And sort of being an Aberdonian, usually the cost of moving midweek is actually a little less.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but you know, it might take a little bit more discussion between buying and selling solicitors to coordinate the dates, because you know there may be other transactions that are happening on the back of that. But yeah, absolutely, I think the moves may take longer now whilst restrictions are in place.
Well, if nothing else, people have realised today you can get a cheaper move middle of the week. I didn't know that.
There you go, hot tip. And that actually segues really nicely into our next question, and it is, can I move house now? And our seller is going to be made to do a deep clean of the property before they move out.
That
one's for Graham.
Yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. I would wholeheartedly encourage you to move. I think at the moment, the guidance again is regarding deep cleaning, that you use domestic cleaning products. There's no point of you inviting some industrial cleaner into your property to deep clean it, because then you are just perhaps creating other issues for other people. So clean your property with domestic cleaning products when you are leaving. Obviously, as an incoming buyer, you probably will be doing that yourself anyway, because everyone's idea of, you know, what is deep cleaned and, you know, what is, you know, may vary from one person to the next. But you know, absolutely, you can move house now. As you know, we've seen in recent years that the spring market is traditionally the best time to move, and then there is a lull during the school summer holidays when everyone's off enjoying themselves. But obviously no one's going to be lying on a beach enjoying the sunshine anywhere really this year. So we expect that the next few months will be basically the spring market postponed. So we are going to see a lot of activity. So I think it would be a good time for people to move now, because we do know what the market is presently like. We do know how it's behaving. It's behaving rationally, or in a way that we can predict, whereas maybe in the future we might not be so certain.
Perfect. And one more question for you, Graham, for this bit.
Yep.
How long should you leave when setting a move-in date? Like, do we need to leave more time than usual? I feel we've kind of answered this a wee bit, but going into specifics.
Yeah, I think it probably would be sensible to do so. The reason for that, well, you know, generally speaking, if you are, you know, a buyer who doesn't have a property to sell and you're hoping to submit an offer today, generally speaking, I might be saying to you, plan to move in about 8 weeks from now. More often than not, if you have a mortgage, the application might take up the first half of that, you know, 8-week period, and then you can make the contract legally binding, and then you can put in place your practical arrangements like booking your removal van, you know, getting your broadband connection sorted and things like that. And those two things in particular are going to be even more important, you know, as we remain in some sort of lockdown home working type situation, because, you know, fortunately, you know, COVID-19 struck in 2020, not in 2005, when none of us had the internet connections that we presently do have now, even though they're, well, touch wood, they've been reliable so far today. But I think, yes, it probably is sensible to give yourself a little bit of extra time. And Paul, Paul DeMarco, you might be able to just comment on the mortgage side of things, and because again, I'm wondering whether the the banks may have staff furloughed and the mortgage applications themselves are maybe taking longer to process as a result.
Yes, absolutely. Of the recent purchases I've done, lenders are definitely taking longer to produce an offer. And you're right, a lot of the staff are still furloughed with most of the lenders. So staffing is less, so it is taking longer for sure. I wouldn't say drastically longer, but I would probably say an extra week before a mortgage offer is now produced. So yes, I would certainly look to a minimum entry date of 8 weeks, if not more.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. Now, I feel this might be kind of the big question, Paul H, that everyone's keen to know.
Is it about my hairdresser?
No, thankfully not. It is, do you expect the Scottish property market to change? And if so, how long do you think it'll take for it to settle down?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question, and probably one we'd expect on a forum such as this. Okay, well, to answer that question, I mean, firstly, I think as we've described today and we've all alluded to, there's a significant pent-up demand. I think we need to see that serviced first. If we take a step back and ask ourselves that question, for me, I think the fundamentals still remain the same, in and around the core Edinburgh market anyway. That I think there's there's always been in recent times a shortage. The demand has outweighed the supply. We've not seen any new build. Certainly that was paused as well. Again, that challenge to build new property. And what we were seeing again prior to this was rising house prices and rising rents. And normally in any normal market, you'd expect to see either rental holding and prices rise or the other way around. But it just shows you that people had to have somewhere to live, and it was about trying to find that. So it's pretty clear that there is still there's going to be a healthy demand, but there are some unknowns, and I think certainly as Paul DeMarco touched on, loan to values is going to be an important play in this. I mean, 85% loan to value at the moment. I think that the positive is at the moment, obviously we still have the First Home Fund, which is the government's extended to 2021, which I think is great to allow first time buyers to get onto the property market, which is absolutely important. I mean, we need to see that happen. People should be able to buy a property. And then I think probably on the wider economic question, it's not sounding like I'm dodging this, Abby, but it's probably too early to say in terms of what will be the impact overall on unemployment, and the wider economic question will have a bearing. All I would say is if we look at 2009, which is a reasonable comparison, we had a very resilient market then. What we might see and what we saw then is we might see a slight cooling. So if there isn't the same demand when somebody's putting in when it goes to closing and its offer's over, a solicitor such as Graham might advise the client, well, you don't need to bid 20% over to secure this property. You might be able to bid a little less. So I think we might see a cooling on the home report valuation, and then I think we just need to see sort of where we are 3-6 months down the line. I mean, how deep this is. But certainly, if you're asking me, do I expect to see a 30% house price crash or that sort of thing? I just don't see that. Just don't see that based on the fundamentals.
Perfect, thank you very much. And our final question from this kind of Q&A section is for you, Paul H. And it is, I understand that ESPC has written to Scottish Government about introducing measures to help stimulate the property market. Have you received a positive response?
Well, so I think two things about this. We've been involved with government for a while on different issues. So, well, boring this audience, cladding has been one of those. The Working Party for the relaxation. So that party's now done its job. Cladding was still in discussions with, and certainly when we were talking to the Working Party around the safe moving protocols, there was a discussion around the stimulus and what we might do. And that's as far as that's gone. So we've been in discussions with government where we've got a further meeting in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll see. I think they want to explore all avenues about what they could do, and again, maybe take a slightly wait and see approach. If the market looks like it's it's taking care of itself, that's good. I would hope if they are to make changes, we get plenty of notice if it's a change to LBTT, that sort of thing. But so it'd be way too early for me to say anything or even to speculate at this stage. But I think what is clear is, we all want to see a fully functioning market. We should want to see first-time buyers able to buy property and get on the ladder. I think that's absolutely essential, and nobody wants to see a boom and bust market either. So, I think that's the only thing I would add to that. So I think any stimulus has to be careful. It can go too far, and we don't want to see that huge boom. So I think it's a wait and see maybe at this stage.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So what we'll now do is we have got a couple of questions already popped in our
Sure.
Q&A, but what I'll do is I'll encourage anyone else, if you've got anything that we've maybe not been able to cover or you'd like some clarification around something, please feel free to kind of fire those questions in our Q&A. But for now, what I will do is I will pick a question and then I'll just fire it out to our panel. So some of this has been covered, but I think it'll be helpful for us to look at it. Have Edinburgh property prices been affected by the pandemic? We had our house valued in February with a view to sell. Should we get it revalued?
I would say certainly talk to your agent. I mean, have prices been affected? Again, it's probably too early to say, and I think the meaningful statistical data probably isn't there, because the number of properties that were agreed during this period, I think, as I said earlier, is probably 80 or 85, 90% down. So, we haven't got that meaningful data sample to give an example, to really be bullish about that. I would say talk to your firm, absolutely. But, certainly I think, back to Graham's point earlier, now is a really good time to be thinking about it. There's a huge uptick in the number of viewing requests, so we know people are actively out there looking. So yeah, I'd check back with your firm, hopefully an ESPC firm, and take it from there. Or definitely an ESPC firm.
Now, I thought this was quite an interesting one. I'm not too sure if we'll have a specific answer for it, but we might be able to kind of point someone in the right direction. If you live in a block of flats and you're aware of someone shielding in the tenement, is your home defined as the flat, or is it extended to the common stairs? E.g., can the shielding family block kind of intended viewings or removal companies and stuff like that if you are wanting to buy or sell?
It's a really good question. I'll pass to Graham on that. I'm not sure I can answer that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I know this is a tricky one, and I'm not sure who has asked the question. I may need to come back to you separately on this, just to give you the definitive answer. But certainly basing it on the guidance that has been published this week by the Scottish Government, there is no definition of what home includes. My guess would be, and this is very much a guess without knowing the answer for certain, but my guess would be that the shielding neighbour cannot prevent you coming in and out of your property via a common stair, and so long as the people who are assisting you with your house move are taking all the necessary precautions, then it should be permissible. But as I say, I would need to go and check the regulations in a lot more detail, just to make sure I'm not saying anything out of turn. But if whoever has asked that question, if by all means, if they want to get in touch with Abby or with me separately out with this meeting, then I can look into that further for you.
I mean, I would just add, if the guidelines aren't clear, we could try and seek some further advice from government on specifics. I mean, if we really need an answer, and we could ask that question. I'm not saying we'll get an answer, but we could try our best.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. So that is us kind of coming to an end here. If there is any questions we've not had a chance to get to, then as mentioned, please do feel free to get in touch with us. We've got a whole bank of property experts who are more than happy to speak to you, and that service is completely free of charge. So I would just like to say thank you for joining us. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to enjoy it twice, you can have a look on our channels. Even if you're just wanting to kind of listen to kind of an answer again and just get complete clarity over it. Obviously, this is quite an evolving situation. So what we will be doing is we will be keeping our website up to date with all the latest guidance and kind of stats as how the situation does progress. So keep a close eye on that. But all I've left to say is thank you very, very much for joining, and I hope you stay safe and best of luck with any home moves. Thank you very much.